There we go. And I will make sure that this presentation does get posted. I noticed it wasn't there when we were just there, so I'll make sure that PowerPoint gets set. Okay. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is really, for this class, we have a dual purpose because we're going to talk about identity and social connection and its antagonist, which is loneliness. And we're going to emphasize the positive aspects of having a strong social connection through identity. But we'll also kind of bring up the dark side of identity, which also sets us up for things like in-group, out-group discrimination and prejudice. So while it is a very positive thing to have in our life, there's always for every positive, there's always a negative. And so we'll get into that a little bit. So this is really setting us up on why we identify with things like our race and our culture and our and why we take pride in having our, if you want to put it, our tribe or our people, and we do what we need to do to protect that because it becomes such a strong sense of who we are. Okay, but to set it up.
Welcome. Today we're delving into the realm of social identity and loneliness. Social identity forms when we affiliate ourselves with certain groups, shaping our self-concept and influencing our behavior. However, when bonds break or exclusion occurs, we experience social loneliness, a disconnection from our social circles, or emotional loneliness, a lack of intimate relationships. Imagine John, an avid soccer player, suddenly unable to play due to an injury. His social identity as a team member wavers, leading to social loneliness. Or consider Mary, who moves to a new city and feels emotionally isolated without her close-knit family nearby. These experiences aren't rare, they're universal, deeply impacting our mental health and societal functioning. Social rejection can lead to feelings of isolation, affecting our self-worth. But understanding these psychological impacts is key. By acknowledging the profound effects of social identity and loneliness, we can foster empathy, reduce stigma, and encourage more supportive, inclusive communities. So, let's continue the conversation and work towards a society where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
Okay. Just a quick introduction on what we're going to be talking about today to get us started. Whoops. Okay.
Welcome.
All right. So first of all, let's start with just some definitions regarding loneliness and what it is and its antagonists, or its opposite, of course, is connection. Okay. Loneliness can be defined as a negative emotional motivational state that one protects us, does a self-protection type thing. It doesn't want us to feel lonely. It doesn't want us to experience rejection and the things that led us to lose our social connections. But at the same time, which makes it a difficult component, is it is also promotes us to get out there and make social connections. So it's like, if we put it in terms of brain processes, on one end, we have the serotonin and the amygdala area that is trying to protect us from any additional harm caused by the loss of some social connection. Okay. On the other part, though, we have the dopaminergic areas of the brain, the reward areas of the brain that are trying to motivate us to go and seek out social connection and regain that sense of connection with other people. Okay. We can define loneliness in two terms, two types of loneliness. The first is what's called social loneliness, also known as social isolation in the literature, if you look it up. And this is an experience when a person doesn't feel they have sufficient number of social connections. So you just don't feel like you, if again, I'm going to put it in terms of community and tribe, it doesn't feel like you have your full tribe and community with you. And you're feeling like you're just not connected with your community anymore. This is a common experience when people go to a university for the first time across the country or something like that, where they lose their sense of community of where they're at. Okay. Emotional loneliness is when there's a loss of a close emotional relationship of some type. So this can be happen when you lose an intimate partner or a close friend. Maybe it's not necessarily the death of someone, which is obviously one of the largest hits to emotional loneliness, but it can also occur when a close friend moves away or isn't able to connect as closely as they usually do. Okay. Now, just like most of our survival mechanisms are how much we eat, how much we drink, uh, water, how much we do, is really a subjective experience. So when I think about food, I know I know an individual who can eat once a day and they're satisfied. Okay. And then there's people like me who need to eat 3 times a day and a snack here in between to feel, satiated, as you would say. Okay. We have to think of loneliness on this same subjective scale. There's some individuals who need very few people to feel that they're connected with their world. And then there's people who need lots of individuals. So I can give a couple examples of this. So in one way, I think of, for example, Facebook. Okay. There's some people on Facebook to feel like they're being, effective in some way on their social networking and those kinds of things that might only need 25, 50 friends on Facebook. And then there's some people who need thousands of friends on Facebook to really feel connected in that online community. Okay. Another example is I have a friend who, when they have a problem or something, they call, we talk it out, they get through it. And then I have another friend who will maybe call me, then maybe call their sister and their mother, and then another friend, and they have to process what they're going through emotionally with several people instead of just one or two. Okay. And these are kind of the subjective experiences of the experience of loneliness and how much someone needs connection. It's very subjective to the individual. Okay. We also have on this list something called social rejection. Okay. And this is slightly different than loneliness. And I want to kind of explain why. I explained that loneliness is a emotional motivational state. Okay. And it can be produced by being rejected by people or by a group, but not. But the experience of rejection is different than our experience with loneliness, and this is where a lot of people kind of um, um, kind of don't have a hard time overcoming, especially close rejection from someone close. But I mentioned that loneliness, if we're looking at brain processes, happen on the dopaminergic, motivational, serotonin, emotional areas of the brain. When we're rejected by someone, it actually, the areas of the brain that start to become active are the opioid areas of the brain, the pain, the physical pain areas of the brain. And this is where it gets a little bit different than the way kind of we've always thought about rejection. Okay. So when we get rejected by someone, our brain actually experiences physical pain. The same areas that light up when you break your arm, cut your finger, get hit in the face with a ball, or any other type of physical insult to the body, is the same area of the brain that lights up when we get rejected by another human being. Okay. Um, and this doesn't even necessarily need to be rejected by someone we know. The research paradigm for this is they'll put someone in an MRI machine and they'll do this what's called super ball. And so what they'll have is just 3 dots on the screen. You represent 1 dot in the screen. You don't know the other 2 people. In fact, you think you're actually playing with real people, but you're really not. You're playing with a computer logarithm. Okay. And what happens is you electronically throw a ball to player A, and then player A then throws it to the player B and then back to you. And you do this for a series of time. But what eventually happens is player A throws it to player B throws it back to player A, hence setting up what you would call rejection. Okay. And even in this simulated game with people that participants don't even know, will never know, will probably never see. Well, actually, they couldn't because, again, it was a computer logarithm. They actually, the physical pain areas of the brain, even in this simulation, start to light up and they start to release opioids trying to damper the feeling of that rejection. Okay. So, just some, some current psychological advice. If you get rejected by someone, we need to treat it as a physical ailment. In fact, one of the best treatments for being rejected by someone right now is actually Tylenol, about 500 milligrams a day for about 5 days, and you'll start actually feeling better from that rejection that you experienced. So, again, something to think about when you're thinking about experiencing the loss of someone or a loss of connection is that these things happen on a physical level, a motivational level, and an emotional level. Okay. So let's talk about some of the psychological reasons why we need to feel connected with each other. And this is the need for belong model. Okay. So on a psychological level, not necessarily a neurological or emotional level, as we were talking about, we connect with others because it gives us a sense of predictability and control. This is self-awareness. So these are what we call cognitive motives. So it gives us the ability to understand, control, and predict our self and our place. And this is where culture and our cultural identity and who we affiliate with really start to come into play when we think about what should the right behavior for me be to be. Well, if we have a strong sense of our cultural identity, we kind of know how we should behave in very unfamiliar situations. We already know how, even sometimes, especially if we're in a marginalized group, how we're going to be treated in certain situations and then how to manage that as a healthy human being. Okay. So on the cognitive anything, we want to understand, meaning we want to predict through shared meaning. And again, if you remember that definition of culture from that video, it's shared meanings and values and ideas. Okay. And then we also want control, the need to perceive contingency between behaviors and outcomes. So we want to understand why people do what they do, especially in unfamiliar situations. And again, when we go back to culture, we look at people who violate cultural norms and follow culture norms to understand what created their behaviors and their outcomes. Okay. And then we have more affective reasons that are on the cognitive level. One, we all strive to feel like we're worthy and improvable. So again, on the cultural level, taking pride in cultural events, being a good member of a culture, all provides this level of self-enhancement. And on the cultural level, if we all share a common beliefs and values about something, then this increased trust. Okay. And this is basically the need to view people as basically benign. All right. And so this, if we were to outline it on psychological definitions, this side of the equation, it gives us self-awareness. Okay. And having that strong identity really provides us with self-awareness about predictability of behavior and how one should and should not act in a given situation. Okay. It gives us a feeling of safety, if you want to put it in that term. Okay. And then on this side, as you can see, it provides us with a sense of self-esteem. Okay. We find the connection between culture and self-esteem is interesting because we often think of self-esteem on the individual level, but we actually find that there's an association between the person's self-esteem and how strong their cultural identity is. The stronger their cultural identity, the more they know about their culture, the higher the self-esteem, because of these self-enhancing and trusting attributes that it provides. Okay. All right. So if we were to kind of put things, talking about this whole identity and self-concept and whatnot, if we were to put it in a circle, and we're going to use William James' term of self-concept. William James is kind of known as the father of American psychology. He wrote two textbooks that were published in the 1890s. And if you go on to get your doctorate degree, I'm willing to bet that you'll read part of that book still. But he coined the term self-concept, okay? And he defined the self-concept as everything that you can say is you. All right. But within that self-concept, he included two types of identity. Okay. The first one and the larger one is our social identity. Okay. This is our identity that is given to us by being members of different social groups. Okay. And there are a lot of them. And this is why this circle is much bigger. You man, woman, non-binary, all of those things that you're doing for the February 9th assignment are all social identities. There's things that are given to us by being a member of a defined group. Okay. And you could probably guess that a subversion of our social identity is our cultural identity. Okay. But I'm going to hold off on that for just a minute. Okay. Then we have our personal identity. James actually referred to this as the spiritual self. Okay. But we have our personal self or our personal identity. And what this is all of our personal qualities that make us different than or unique compared to the person who's sitting next to us. Okay. And so it's represented, this is our intelligence level. This is our emotional intelligence. This is our emotional reactivity. This is our different personality traits, whether we're introverted or extroverted or easy to anger, or all of those different factors that make you uniquely you. Okay. Now, you probably noticed that there are parts that overlap. Okay. Most social identities are what we call transient. Okay. So they will come and go as we age. So, for example, I'm hoping that everyone in this class someday will drop their social identity as college students because you graduated, and then you pick up a different social identity, which is whatever career it's want or whatever life you wanted based on your experiences and development as a student. Okay. Other social identities, such as being a child, an adolescent, a young adult, all of those identities will change as we age through the life cycle. Okay. There are some identities that don't necessarily change and they become very integrated into who we are, that are social, but then we integrate them, we meld them into who we uniquely are. So if you strongly feel that an important aspect of what makes you you and what makes you unique is, for example, your gender identity, whether you're a man or a woman, and being strongly feminine and female is very important to your identity. Well, one, that's not an identity that's probably going to change if you're strongly connecting with it. And two, it's part of something that defines you as personally unique. So those are the identities that kind of overlap with each other. Okay. Um, Many young adults will become parents, and that's something that will never really end. Even when they're adults, trust me. And so being a parent eventually will become one of those things that is both personally defining but is also socially defining. Okay. And so the one thing that so let's now talk about culture. Okay. If being a member, for example, of your Native American tribe is something that is important to you, it defines who you are, or at least defines part of who you are, that would, whoa, that would also go in this area as well. How much of this area depends on the individual. However, if you're one of those who kind of doesn't think culture is that important, yes, I am, you understand that you're European white or that you're Tana Otham or something like that, but it's not something that you want or feel you need to have it as a personal identification, then that's when your cultural identity would sit outside here because you don't want it to, or you don't see it influencing you as a unique personal individual. Okay. Now, if we do talk about health and well-being, we do know that healthier individuals, these three things align: the personal, social, and cultural identities align with each other. And we find that individuals who have a very loose cultural identity don't feel close to their peoples or their tribe or who they come from. They tend to struggle a bit more with mental health and stuff like that, which we'll kind of show here in just a minute. Okay. So let's talk about some different concepts that we know loneliness and identity influence. And I mentioned this before. Okay. First of all, I just do want to, because I really think it's important to distinguish the difference between mental health and mental illness. These two terms tend to get very confused with each other. But the way that I would encourage you to think about these two things is mental health can be analogous to physical health. Okay. And mental illness can be equivalent to a physical disease. All right. So the example that I'd like to provide here is that you can have poor physical health, but not necessarily have a physical disorder. Okay. In the same way, you can have very, very poor mental health, but that doesn't necessarily you have a mental illness that can be diagnosed and treated. Okay. Now, having poor mental health and poor physical health, does that increase our chances of getting a mental or physical disorder? Yes, it does. Absolutely. We can't deny that. But the reason why I bring this up is a lot of people who do things like criminal behavior, we always tend to mislabel them. Most of them do struggle with mental health. For example, school shooters, we have found do struggle with social well-being, mental well-being, and those types of things. But not a lot of them actually have a diagnosed mental illness. Okay. And then people with mental illnesses are actually less likely to be criminally minded. So I like separating these because I often kind of get annoyed when they say, oh, a school shooter or a mass shooter or someone like that, they must have a mental illness or a disorder of some type, when in reality, they just have very poor mental health. Because I will tell you, someone with severe depression doesn't have the energy or motivation to go plan a shooting. Someone with anxiety would be way too anxious to even enter into the thoughts of hurting other people. And so there's a difference between mental health and mental illness. I will get off my soapbox and we'll finish this up. So now, how does identity and loneliness influence our mental health? And let's talk about that for just a minute. One of the lines of research that I'm into right now is the influence of loneliness and identity on mental health and physical health. Okay. And yes, what we have found is that loneliness, there was a research that came out just 6-7 years ago. 1 week of loneliness is like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes. 1 week, 7 days, 2 packs of cigarettes. Okay. And what we've actually found more and more is that the more extended amount of loneliness that we have, it actually starts to change the genetic code to our immune system and starts weakening the immune system. Okay. Why? Because it's experiencing a failure to thrive, a failure to connect. We're a social being. And so it's like, okay, well, looks like we're getting to the end. Okay. And loneliness is one of the best predictors of our mortality, how long we'll live, and our morbidity, the probability of actually getting a chronic illness of some type. So this is kind of the importance of this that we should really look at. Okay. Now, how does identity play a role in our experience of loneliness? Okay. And this is where we can look at studies that were very simple and they were not meant to be negative in nature. Okay. So I'm going to run you through two conditions that people were put in. These two bars right here and these over here you can kind of ignore, because what those are what's called control conditions. What those do is they establish what is considered a baseline. Okay. A baseline is what you would expect to measure in a general population. So if I were just to give everyone a measure of loneliness, we would average to about these green line and to this blue line. Okay. Now, the two conditions that we are, please excuse the barking in the background, is these two, what we call experimental conditions. Okay. One is what we call a social identity condition, and the other is a personal identity condition. Okay. So again, we're going to put this in the positive. Is in the social identity condition, what we're going to simply ask is, for example, in the first study, in the other studies, we used other identities, but in the first study, we put what are 5 positive things about being a college student? Because the participants we had in that group were college students. What are 5 positive things about being a college student? Okay. In the personal identity condition, we simply asked, what are 5 personal qualities that make you uniquely you? Again, positive qualities. We asked for 5 personal positive qualities. Okay. And then afterwards, we simply gave a measure of loneliness. All right. And as you could see in this condition, the people who gave qualities of who they were based on some type of group membership scored less than even the average person would if they were just given a measure of loneliness. Okay. And yes, in later variations of this research, we asked about cultural identity. What's 5 you one, we asked, what do you consider your culture identity? And then what are 5 positive things about that? And the results were basically the same. Okay. But what happens when we only reflect on ourself, on just who we are as just person, independent of everyone else? Well, we measure almost twice as baseline and 3/4 more than when we're reflecting on our identity with other people, with our group, with our peoples. Okay. Hence, we can see that we don't even need people to be physically around to have the benefits of having membership to something that is close to us, such as our culture, such as being a college student, and those types of things. Okay. If we expand on this, oh, I'm starting to squeak. If we expand on this, we can see it run through this cycle. Okay. And this is what's called the failure to belong cycle. Okay. So we experience some denial, loss, or damage of our social identity. Okay. Whether it be our cultural identity or gender identity, whatever it may be. Okay. We go through this phase about, well, who do I belong to? Emotional loneliness. And then we start to question ourselves, well, where do I belong? That's social loneliness. And if this is extended over time, we start to experience a failure to survive. We start to experience things like more unemployment. We might start to experience addiction. We might start to experience more loss of other people in our world. Okay. This then leads to lower mortality and morbidity, as I mentioned in the previous slides. And then these are all of the things that are associated with for when we don't have strong social identities and pride in who we belong to. Okay. We see suicide rates go up, addiction goes up, relationship problems, chronic homelessness, mood disorders, criminal behavior, aggression towards others in society, and gang affiliation. All of these things are strongly tied to this cycle, or what we call the failure to belong cycle. Okay. So again, when we marginalize minority groups even more, and we start to see these things increase within the community, it shouldn't be surprising. Okay, because this is exactly what this cycle predicts. When we reject others and do all of those things to make them feel like they don't belong in all of these things, and we wonder why these rates tend to increase among those communities and among those peoples, it shouldn't be surprising. from the outsider looking in perspective as well. Okay. Now, I just mentioned these benefits of having a strong identity. We live longer, we live healthier, we feel like we belong, we become more resistant towards things like addiction and psychological and physical disorders and homelessness and all of those things. Okay, very, very important and strong benefits. And it's no wonder that we try to seek out who we belong to, okay? But social identity theory in and of itself didn't actually start to look at the benefits of identity except within about the last 20, 25 years. It was actually developed to explain things like prejudice and discrimination, why the Nazis did what they did, why we could even say what the white Europeans did to native tribes here in the Americas, okay? Is the basic idea is that we use what's called social comparison theory and self-esteem. Like we want to think well of ourselves, we also by extension want to think well about who we belong to or are in group, okay? And so in order to maintain a strong sense of who we are at the individual level of being a member of a group that we belong to, we compare ourselves to others who are different, and by extension, other groups or out groups, okay? In this comparison, we want to think well of who we are, so we negatively evaluate other groups. This is called downward comparison in order to make our group more lifted to that other group. Now, this is going to get more complicated as we move along in the semester, and when we speak about this in more detail when we get to in-group, out-group discussions. But right now, we're going to just look at the downward comparison. There's also something called upward comparison, where we're a member of a marginalized group and we're looking at the majority group, and there's different mechanisms we use to try and protect ourselves in those situations as well. Okay. Whether it's upward comparison or downward comparison, this all can lead to things called prejudice and discrimination. So this can lead us to think negatively of other groups. If we feel threat, we're going to talk about, what is it called? Something threat. It's a threat theory that when we feel like we're going to lose resources, we look at out groups and blame that loss of resources on those out groups, and therefore it justifies our discrimination. We can kind of see that right now between the United States and Latin American people who are trying to come to the country and escape horrific things in their own country. But they use that. And I do want to just say something really quick as a psychologist. When we think that by deporting everybody here in the United States, it's going to get rid of all of our rapists and murderers and killers, it's only going to reduce those rates by 1.5%. So we still have to figure out how to then reduce it by that other 98.5%, which are done by American citizens. Just want to put that tidbit out there for the ones who think we're going to actually reduce our crime by getting rid of undocumented people. Anyways, so I am actually thinking that we're going to end here because the rest of these slides are for one of my other classes. And so I'm going to stop sharing right now. And I'm going to ask, I promise that we try and get out of here in